We have the inflation numbers that the Bureau of Labor Statistics released today for the month of July. And as an economist, I want to walk you through the numbers because I want you to be able to tell your friends and family what the heck is going on with the US economy. So if we look to the month of July, if we look at the price of goods, we can see that including food and energy, the rate of inflation increased by 0.1%. This means that the rate of inflation, which is above the Federal Reserve's target rate of about 2%, still remains stubbornly elevated. And we can look to some of the other numbers from this report to explain why. Now, if we look a little bit deeper, we can see that for the month of July, the prices of energy did in fact fall by about 1.5%. Most of this decline in this last month is specifically related to fuel and gasoline prices. However, if we compare fuel and gasoline prices from this time this year to this time last year, what we see is that there's been a 25% increase in fuel and gasoline prices. And we can also look to airline prices to see if the effects of an increase in fuel prices has spilled over into other goods. And we can actually see that airline prices have also increased by about 25% since this time last year. So fuel prices, along with food prices, which have also come down slightly in this past month, have contributed to a lot of the increase of the inflation we are seeing in the last year. Now, as economists, we like to talk about inflation in two different ways, with the cost of food and energy included and without the cost of food and energy included. And it's not that food and energy are not important. The reason that we want to look at inflation without food and energy is because food and energy prices tend to be incredibly volatile. And because the prices of food and energy are jumping all over the place versus other types of goods where inflation tends to be more sticky, it's important for us to understand whether or not the underlying inflation we are seeing is more permanent. And looking at core inflation, we can see that in the month of July, it rose by 0.2%, which means that compared to this time last year, core inflation has increased by about 2.5%, which means that the rate has remained relatively stable, but again, still incredibly elevated. From this report, what I have been the most interested in is how inflation is affecting people's wages, right? How much people are earning in relation to how much prices are rising. If your wages are going up, but inflation is rising faster than your wages, then the amount that you can buy this time currently is less compared to what you were able to buy this time last year. So now that we have the inflation data, we can see that a lot of the gains of wages that were reported on in the unemployment report last week have been largely eroded by inflation, falling by about 0.2%. This means that people's purchasing power has largely declined since this time last year. This means that in practice, people are going to feel like their wages don't go as far, right? Because inflation and the cost of goods that they would normally buy is rising faster. And it makes a lot of sense that a lot of people don't feel so good about the economy when something like this happens. And I don't think enough people put focus on this. Now, all of this economic data is very interesting, given the fact that the Federal Reserve is set to meet next month to discuss interest rates, right? The Federal Reserve uses interest rates almost as a lever to try and fix major problems within the economy pertaining to both unemployment and inflation. And depending on what is the more pertinent problem, they choose to either raise or lower interest rates, because the reality is that inflation and unemployment have opposing strategies when it comes to interest rates. When you have high unemployment, you tend to want lower interest rates, but lower interest rates can exacerbate inflation. And that's where the Federal Reserve runs into this conundrum right now, because they are dealing with both problems at the same time. And the question is what do you do, or do you choose not to do anything? But the issue is not doing anything could also lead to the exacerbation of both unemployment as well as interest rates. And so the Federal Reserve has a very critical decision to make. And this is underscored by the fact that, number one, we have a midterm election coming up in the next 2 months where the number one issue remains the health and well-being of the economy. And number two, there is pressure from this administration and the White House in terms of keeping interest rates low because that's their own personal prerogative. So it's very stressful. I would not want to be at the Federal Reserve right now making this decision. But for now, that's all I got. And as always, if you have any questions, let me know.